Hello, I'm Ollie and this is Criminally, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, crime, pulp and horror. It's my weekly wrap-up. So I've had a pretty decent reading week this week. I've got 6 books to talk to you about today. At least one of those books I didn't much like at all. One of them I thought was fantastic, and the other 4 kind of span the spectrum in between. The most important thing to mention though before I start the video is that I'm now on book 100 of my Read What You Own challenge. So I am very, very nearly there. I expect to finish that challenge, if not today, then certainly this weekend. Right, so let's get into the books then. So I'll talk about the 6 books I've finished, talk about what I'm reading, talk about what I'm going to be reading next, and also talk about, as I always do, what's been on the channel and what is coming on the channel in the next week. So in terms of what I finished then, so the first thing I finished this week, which I finished last weekend, was The Hellfire Club by Peter Straub. So this was our Patreon group read this month. And this was good, but it was really long. So 600 plus pages long. And it definitely felt like it was longer than it needed to be. So it's about a publisher, which is, or like a publishing house, which is run by this family, and in particular the daughter-in-law of the family, who starts to investigate this one book they've published, which is really, really successful, and their fortune was kind of founded on this one book that had a mysterious author. Her husband is obsessed with this book, so she's kind of looking into the history of this book. But there's also a series of murders happening in the town that they live in, like a serial killer is operating, so that kind of all gets mixed up in it as well. And the book goes in all sorts of different directions, and it felt somewhat disjointed to me at parts. There's one scene in particular which I felt was just unnecessarily horrific, and not in a good, not in a good way. You read horror books to be horrified sometimes, but there was one protracted sexual assault scene that I just thought was unnecessary. So the book goes in all sorts of different directions, and there's a lot of stuff reflecting back on this particular writer and a writer's retreat he was at, like back in the kind of 30s, I think. So there's all of this stuff gets kind of mixed up, and the book sometimes feels like so at times it felt like Peter Straub didn't quite know which direction to go in, but he did do a really good job of putting it all back together again in like the final couple of chapters, and I ended up thinking it was really good, but it was something of a slog to get there at times. It definitely was a longer book than it needed to be, but some incredibly tense passages in there, some sections of it that were really, really gripping. So overall I thought it was good, but yeah, probably could have done with a slightly stricter editor. After that, someone else who often could do with a slightly stricter editor, Stephen King. So I finished Song of Susannah, book 6 in the Dark Tower series. I like this more than book 5. So book 5, Wolves of the Calla, I wasn't a huge fan of. I felt it was too long, and there's this big kind of digression in the middle. This was more focused, albeit towards the end, when it gets kind of more and more kind of, I don't know, kind of a bit kind of new agey and fantasy-y. I didn't like it as much. But a lot of this I really enjoyed. A lot of it has the characters kind of travelling between different worlds and different times and things like that. And I always really enjoy that in books. I enjoy that kind of situation where you get a character from one world dumped into another world and see how they cope. So there's a lot of stuff that I thought was really good in this. There's some very, very exciting bits. There's real kind of tension in here, and I can't go into it in any detail at all because it will spoil it, but there's something King does like right at the end of this, like the epilogue of this book, that I just thought was really fun. I really enjoyed the kind of final few pages of this. So yeah, that was a hit for me, and looking forward to reading the final book in the series, The Dark Tower, which I will get to in the next month or so, I suspect. Right, after that then, a reread for me. So this was for the Kindle Kobo Clean Out event, where one of the prompts was to start or continue a series. So I did both. I restarted a series I'd started in the past. This is the Charlie Parker series by John Connolly. So the first book of that is Every Dead Thing, which is a very, very dark crime, mystery, serial killer type book. So Charlie Parker, the detective hero, loses his wife and daughter at the start of the book to a horrific serial killer, and the rest of the book is him investigating another case which ends up overlapping with his investigation of the murders of his wife and daughter. Again, it was a bit too long, so it's 460 pages. I felt like it could have been like 350 pages and would have been better. It goes off on some tangents, and some parts of the book take longer than they needed to. I found it a little bit confusing and muddled at times. There are loads of characters in this book, and I found that a bit too much. But when it's good, it's really, really good, and I did overall enjoy it, and definitely want to read more of the Charlie Parker books. So yeah, that's the book I first read around the time it came out in the late 90s. So yeah, really enjoyed rereading it. Not a perfect book, but definitely a really good book, and keen to read more of the Charlie Parker books, both to follow the character, because I think he's an interesting character, but also to see how John Connolly's writing style develops over time. After that, I read something that definitely couldn't be accused of being too long, a short, fun book, The Final Continent by D.C. McManus, with illustrations by Simon Bisley. So this is a book that was sent to me a while ago by the publisher Neotext, and it was really fun. So this is a post-apocalyptic story about a future world where like people have like cybernetic implants, and it's all like terribly dystopian and awful. And Antarctica is like this final continent which is like completely wild. And the central character, who's kind of a bit of a kind of mercenary gun for hire type character, ends up going on a mission to Antarctica, and fighting, like polar bears and all sorts of stuff. So it was really, really pulpy, quite funny at times, had a definite kind of stream of dark humour through it. It reminded me a lot of something you might see in 2000 AD, the British comic. It's got that kind of, I'm trying to think of how to describe it, that kind of like very violent, lots of black humour, quite over the top, but just really, really entertaining. So yeah, I had fun with that. Not perfect, but definitely a very enjoyable, quick read. And I think it's on Kindle Unlimited if you fancy trying it. And the illustrations by Simon Bisley, who did do illustrations, did artwork for many of the comic strips in 2000 AD, and I suspect still does, was really good as well. So that was a nice addition. It's nice to have illustrations in a book sometimes. They do just give you a little bit extra, don't they? So that was a fun read. My least favourite read of the month the week rather, is the next one. So that was The Night House by Joe Nesbo, which has a fantastic cover. I really, really love this cover. And the first 100 pages or so of this book I really, really enjoyed. So it starts out feeling like a Goosebumps book. So this teenage kid, like weird stuff is happening around him, and he loses like a couple of his friends die in really, really weird circumstances. He sees them die, but then the adults, the police, the authorities just don't believe him because his story is much too weird and crazy. So I really enjoyed that part of it. It was just fun. It was just really, really fun. But then as the book progresses, Joe Nesbo layers more and more things on top of it, and ends up trying to like taking the story in a different direction, which I've enjoyed less and less the more of it I read. So there's kind of 3 layers to this story, and I enjoyed the silliest layer the most, and they get more and more serious as the book goes on. So yeah, overall, not a great read for me. Parts of it I really enjoyed, but overall I didn't like it. So finally then, the final thing I finished this week, I thought I'd read this before, mostly because I've had this copy for decades, but on reading it, I don't think I had read it before. I think I just bought this book and never got around to reading it. So this is Population 1280 by Jim Thompson. So Jim Thompson, a fairly well known crime writer from like the 50s and 60s. This came out I think in 64. This was great. This is one of those books where the longer, and I only finished it yesterday, but I haven't stopped thinking about it since I finished it. And the more I think about it, the more I liked it. So set around the time of the First World War, and follows the narrator and main character, a guy called Nick Corey, who's the sheriff of this small southern town. And he appears to be a kind of bumbling fool. and does as little as possible in his job as sheriff. So his philosophy is that if he arrested one person, he'd have to arrest everyone in the town because everyone's doing something wrong. The more you read of the book, the more you come to realise that he's not a bumbling fool at all. He's actually really quite smart and probably a psychopath. And the book just kind of escalates and escalates as it goes on, so that there's violence fairly early on in the book, and that just gets more and more and more amped up as the book continues, as these kind of schemes that he is involved in get more and more convoluted and require more and more extreme measures to bring them to their closure, shall we say. What's really, really interesting about this book is it feels like there's a lot of kind of commentary on things in this book. So one of the major kind of subplots of the book is the fact that he is being re-elected as sheriff. He's up for election again, and there's loads of stuff about how he kind of manipulates the voters and things like that in order to try and get re-elected. So it was just really, really interesting. And Thompson's one of those writers who is, he's definitely a crime writer. He writes crime books. His books are adored by crime fans, but he just layers something else on top, which is always really, really interesting. And this book, not uncommonly for his books, at least one other book by him I can think of does this, has this extra thing he throws in at the end, which just makes you reflect on the whole story in a completely different way. So I really thought this was great. I gave it 4 stars when I finished it. I've slept on it now, and I'm upping that to 5 stars. I really, really think it was excellent. So, as discussed earlier, I'm on to the final book now of my 100 book challenge. So, this survivalist book, which I hope to finish this weekend. This is just fun. It's just a survivalist book. It's stupid fun. There hasn't been that much action yet. I'm 50 pages in. It feels like it's building up to the action. So yeah, I am enjoying that. When I finish that, I will be reading Maynard's House by Herman Raucher. I think that's the next thing I'll be reading. And then I do need to get back to finish off reviewing submissions for the Garbology, Garb August anthology as well. So looking forward to reading some more of those this weekend too. In terms of channel stuff then, so in the last week you've had my review of The Melting by Liza Spit. You had a small book haul of books that people have sent to me. You had my video about the fact I was entering the final 10 books of my Read What You Own challenge, and you had 10 horror authors that I want to read more of in 2024. In the week ahead then, we're doing a kind of wrap-up video for my Read What You Own challenge, assuming I finish this, which I'm pretty confident I will, with an announcement about what I'm going to do next. I've got my TBR for February. I've got a video about how I'm trying to make my reading as fun and stress-free as possible going forward. And I'll probably do a review of Population 1280 as well, because I think I've definitely got more things to say about this book. Anyway, I will leave it there. Let me know if you've read any of the books I talked about today and what you thought of them. Let me know what you've been reading this week. And as always, thanks very much for watching. I hope you're safe and well out there. I hope you're reading good stuff. And I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.